Hi folks, this is Mr. Weston here, and this will be my Final Fantasy trading card game Opus 1 complete review. In essence, this will be all the cards that have been out so far for Opus 1. At the time of this recording, the promo Sephiroth card has in fact been out at the moment, and Lightning promo card will be coming out to stores hopefully this week. None of them will be shown in this video, of course. I sadly have not been able to obtain a Sephiroth promo card, and of course Lightning is just hit stores. So we'll be showing off the Fire, Ice, Water, Earth, Wind, Lightning, and the Starter Light and Dark and Starter exclusive cards. So pretty much part 1 will be Fire. And pretty much it will be part 1 Fire, part 2 Ice, part 3 Wind, part 4 Earth, part 5 Lightning, part 6 Water, part 7 Light, Dark, and Starter exclusives. Essentially, those are the cards you can only get if you have get the starter boxes. So, let's get started with Fire. We'll also show off the foil cards, which I also have. Which won't be all of them, of course, but the ones that I do have foils off will be showcased as well. So for starters, we will bring out the Oren. So these are 1001. Essentially, what happens here is he's a 6 crystal summon. So for a forward, so he can actually attack. So if he ends up dealing damage, you can play 1 fire back up from your hand onto the field dull. So essentially on its side. Not too bad of a card, which is kind of funny because this is in fact this is the rarer version. We'll bring this off over here, and here is in fact the rare version of Oron. For some reason, I feel this one for people who play a lot of backups will be more useful. In fact, so the backups you control cannot be broken by opponent's summons or abilities. There's quite a few of them actually, so that's actually quite handy to have. The next one is in fact Red Mage, which is a pretty low 2 cost backup. So essentially, if you discard a card, you can bring this out straight away. So of course, if you choose 1 forward, you cannot block this turn. So if your opponent does have a blocker on the field, you can pretty much pay 1 fire, any other element, and pretty much turn it on its side, and it can't block. Next up, we have Ifrit, which is a nice EX burst. So if for some reason you take damage, this is the card that comes out. You can summon it, you can use its ability at no cost, which is pretty much to deal 4,000 damage to your opponent's card. Not too bad, actually. Considering a majority of the some of the cards that I will show off here will in fact have 4,000 power to it. So this is actually quite nice. Next up will in fact be, let's bring it out, Warrior of Light. So this is your 2 cost summon. So it's not 2 cost Warrior of Light. It's not too bad actually, because if you try and deal damage to a forward, and it does have 5,000 power, you can actually double it instead. But of course it has to be a cost 4 or more. So say if I was to attack Oron, which has 9,000 power, this is now 10,000. Not too bad actually. Next up we have Garland. So this isn't a 5 cost to bring out. Now this one has Brave. Essentially when this card attacks, normally cards will have to dull, or forwards will dull when they attack. Garland does not. He actually stays up. So when he attacks, he stays there. And of course, when he does attack, he gains 4,000 power. Not too bad, actually. It's quite good. Now, next up, we have Godot. So essentially, when he enters the field, you can play 1 fire forward, of course, 2 or less from your hand, which is actually pretty good. It's saved me a couple of times, because I normally main a fire and wind deck. Godot is in fact in my deck normally. Of course, I've got 3 copies of that. And of course, when he enters the field, all forwards you control gain 1,000 power to the end of turn. Not too bad, actually. Next up, we have Ranger. which is actually not too bad if you do want to deal a bit of damage to your any of your cards that are out. So of course, if it costs 3 or less, which is actually not too bad. Some of the cards I'm going to show off will have 3 or less. You can just deal at 2,000 damage. Quite nice. Next up, we have, let's bring this out, Cloud. So of course we do have the foil on the left, normal on the right. This one's a little bit more prominent. So of course, if you do control another 7 category, which is in fact this category right there, he pretty much gains another 2,000 power. So at a 2 cost with 7,000 power, not too bad actually. And of course, when he does enter the field, you can choose one up forward your opponent controls and deal 2,000 damage. So if you do already have another forward out that can attack, and Cloud cards come out and deal 2,000, you can do a little bit more to it. And potentially break it. More on that later. Next we have Black Mage. So of course, this is another nice backup. And of course, if you do pay your fire cost and dull it, you can pretty much just put this card straight into the break zone, choose one forward, and deal 4,000 damage. So far, Godot is the only card that I have so far that we're showing here that has 4,000 damage. You can pretty much get rid of Godot straight away. Next up, we have Evoker. This one's a little bit tricky. By that I mean it is a 1 cost backup. Not too bad, but I'm sure there have been better ones out there. There are better backups so far that also have abilities. Pretty much just a little collection sort of thing, just to fill the fill the album out, but otherwise, not too bad. Next up, we have Zack. So, like Cloud, if you do have another Category 7 out, or at least this is a Category 7, and he's 6,000 power. If you control Aerith, which we'll get into later, so he gains another 2,000 power. So, essentially, 3 cost, 8,000. That's not too bad, especially with Garland being a 5 cost and 8,000 as well. And of course, when he does enter the field, choose one forward your opponent controls, do 2,000 damage, just like Cloud. Next up, we have Saz from Final Fantasy 13. So of course, when he does dull, like so, you can choose one forward, deal 2,000 damage, but from the following turn he comes back, he does not activate. So essentially, when your next turn starts, you can pretty much move all your cards that you have dulled back up. But in this instance, he will not do that. And if you do cast Brunhilde, which we'll get into later, he will deal 4,000 damage instead, which is enough to take out Godot. And he will also not activate during that next active phase. Next up, we have Samurai. So it's a nice 3 cost forward that you can bring out. And of course, like Garland, if he does attack, it does not cause his forward to dull. Not too bad. Again, there have been somewhat better ones, but again, at 3 cost, not too bad. Next up, we have Jecht from Final Fantasy X. Now, of course, this is Dissidia Final Fantasy X, but of course, still 10. So for each forward your opponent controls, Jecht gained 1,000 power. So if your opponent does have a lot of forwards out, well, Jecht does getting a bit of extra power to it. Now, Ultimate Jecht Shot, which I'll bring it up a little bit closer. If you choose one forward, you can break it, but the cost here is a copy of himself, a fire. So pretty much, if you dull another backup, that will do it. You could discard a card for the 2 cost or dull another 2 backups, and then he has to dull himself. Choose one forward, break it. I'm not 100% sure if this is a good decision, but oh well. See how you go there. Next we have Tifa. So of course, this is another 2 cost forward here. And of course, if she does come out into the field straight away, if this character can attack or use abilities containing, the dull signal, the turn that she enters the field. So if you do play this first turn, you can pretty much just deal 1 damage to your opponent straight away. So combine that with Godot, you can bring Tifa out. You've got 2 forwards, she can attack. You've got Godot out there to defend. Nice. Next up, we have Daj from Final Fantasy 13. So if you do control Saz, which is that card right there, it cannot be chosen by your opponent's summons or abilities. Essentially, Auron 1002 has that exact same ability, but for all backups. So, not 100% sure if this will be useful for some people, but then again, this is Opus 1, and there can be another Saz coming out. So, we'll see how this one plays out. Next up, and I'm glad I actually have this one, Bahamut. So, you'll notice the cost for summoning Bahamut, and this is in fact another summon, is pretty high, I have to admit. Bahamut is from Final Fantasy 13. So you do choose up to 2 forwards your opponent controls and deal them 10,000 damage. And if they're put onto the field into the break zone this turn, remove them from the game instead. So essentially your break zone is your graveyard from Yu-Gi-Oh! Let's be honest here, we'll use that term. And of course, if you remove it, it cannot be used again. Some people have been using Bahamut, which is good, but I'm not 100% sure if I'll use it myself. Again, the cost to summon it is pretty high. Again, so essentially, if you do have 5 backups, you can use. That's good. That's pretty much 4 cost. That's 5 down. But then you got to discard another 2 cards in order to summon it. So there's that. Next, we have ourselves Chocobo Chick. So of course this is from Final Fantasy 13. This is the Chocobo that's in Saz's hair. So of course you can choose 1 fire backup and activate it. So you pay a fire, you dull it, and choose another fire backup. Not 100% sure if this is effective, but then again this is still early days. So there you go, Chocobo Chick. Nice. And of course you can't have Bahamut from Final Fantasy 13 without Fang from Final Fantasy 13. If you do have Bahamut, if you do summon Bahamut and you do have Fang on the field, the cost to reduce it is reduced by 2. So rather than have it as a 9 cost, you can have it as a 7 cost instead. Slightly better, but oh well. Let's see how that goes. So of course, when Fang does attack, Fang gains first strike until the end of turn. So first strike, and I'm sure we have not mentioned first strike actually. So first strike is when you do damage to your opponent, this card's damage will go first. So if she attacks for 7,000, okay, we'll bring out Samurai. Samurai will not do 6,000 power to Fang. Fang will only do 7,000 to Samurai, thereby breaking it, go into its break zone. And Fang still lives. That's alright. Next we have Firion. Now this one is in fact from Final Fantasy 2. More on that later. So of course when Firion does enter the field, choose 1 forward and deal it 4,000 damage. Again, enough to take out Godot if you do bring this out into the field, and potentially a few other cards that we have out. Oh, and Tifa as well. Don't know why I'm picking on Godot, but why not? And Firion, again, this time from the City of Final Fantasy 2. Oh, it's the City of Final Fantasy, so the fighting game. This one's a little bit different. You'll notice a whole lot of pay costs in order to activate some of its abilities. So, for example, move this out of the way. So if you were to pay 1, you can choose either to gain First Strike or Brave. So if you do pay 2, well, 1 separately and another 1 separately, you can have First Strike and Brave, therefore meaning he can attack straight away and do damage first and still be, and still, of course, be able to not dull. Of course, you can also pay its 2 costs for each one, which is choose 1 forward, deal 1,000 damage, and Firion gains 1,000 power to the end of the turn. Not too bad. Next up, we have Brynhilda. Now, this one's a lifesaver for a lot of people. Actually, that's won me a couple of beat a couple of cards before. So, of course, you choose 1 forward, deal it 7,000 damage. And, of course, since it is an EX burst, if you do end up drawing it for your damage, this is pretty much a free 7,000 damage, which is enough to take out so far a majority of the cards that we have, with the exception of Auron and Garland. Oh, and Jack as well. So there you go. Not too bad. Next up, we have Mages from Final Fantasy 3. Of course, when Mages does enter the field, you do 3,000 damage to all the forwards your opponent controls. That's not too bad if you do want to deal a bit of damage and then go in for the attack. This could be enough for your opponent to either take the damage to keep their forwards alive, or block them and potentially get rid of their forwards. There you go. Next up we have Squire from Final Fantasy Tactics. It's a nice 2 cost for 5,000 power, but again, this is a standard unit with no abilities at all. There is some cards that can mitigate that, but again, more on that later. Next up is Squire, this time, bring that one away, the male version from Final Fantasy Tactics. Well, we just had the female Squire, this is the male Squire. 1 cost, 3,000 power. Again, there are cards that will mitigate the fact that this is a not as useful card as you might think, but there you go. Next up, we have Lan from the recent World of Final Fantasy. It's nice that they bring these out straight away. So, of course, Lan's ability is that he cannot be blocked by a forward with a power greater than his. Lan cannot block a forward with a power greater than his. So, essentially, if you do have something like Firion out with 7,000 power, he can, of course, be blocked by Lan. But if Lan was to attack an opponent, say, with Tifa on the other side of the field, she cannot block, and he cannot block her. So, sort of a double-edged sword here with Lan. And you can't have Lan without Ren from, again, World of Final Fantasy. So, of course, there's another EX burst. So, if Ren does enter the field, like, as from a damage, she can actually search for a copy of Lan and add it to your hand. Which is not too bad. And, of course, if you do pay the fire, another element, and dull her, Lan can gain 1,000 power to the end of turn. Not too bad. Next up, we have Red from Final Fantasy VII. It's actually, as of this recording, is he celebrating, I think it's its 20th anniversary? I'm not 100% sure. But Final Fantasy is celebrating its 30th anniversary. Actually, no, Final Fantasy is celebrating its 30th anniversary. No, Final Fantasy VII is in fact celebrating its 20-year anniversary. So this white card will gain First Strike. I think we have covered First Strike already. So of course, if this forward does attack a forward that doesn't have First Strike, this forward deals damage first. 2 costs at 5,000 power. That's alright. And of course, last card up for the fire is Lebriru from Final Fantasy 13. So all the fire forwards you control gain 1,000 power. So all the fire forwards that you see here, they can attack. If you bring this onto your side of the field, it gains 1,000 power. So of course, Bread 13 could have 6,000, Lan can have 8,000, Squires can have 4 and 6 respectively. There you go. And that is all the fire cards for the Opus 1 collection. Nice little look there. There you go. So now we'll bring out, so for part 2, we are going to be showing off the ice cards that are out for Opus 1. This is Mr. Weston. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.